Hello, thanks for stopping by. I am your everyday average Jonathan. I am an ordinary guy with ordinary tools making extraordinary things outside of the ordinary. I'm an amateur blacksmith, a self-taught woodsworker, a craftsman. The items that I tend to make are whimsical, fantastical. Many of them echo times of forgotten yore, if you will. I make everything from armor to weapons to furniture to practical items that I use every day on my ranch here in Colorado. Along the way, you will see my process, the mistakes that I make, the hard-won knowledge that I gain from it, and then the final products. This week, we are going to be making a Roman Gladius. Why? Because they're really cool. They have great historical significance, and they're really, really fun to have in your shop. Come on in, let's start the process. Look forward to having you. The Roman Gladius was a short sword used by the army of the Republic of Rome and then the Roman Empire from 300 BC all the way until 300 AD, a full 600 years. It was the go-to weapon for the armies of Rome and their foot soldiers, the legionnaires. This is that classic Roman legionnaire sword that you've seen in pretty much every movie about Rome and any picture book that you've ever read about the Roman legionnaires. As is the case with many things that Rome has made famous, this sword's form and function was borrowed from a group of Celts that made their home on the Iberian Peninsula. Rome warred against them, and then after conquering them, adopted some of the best practices and those best items of that culture. Among many things, Imperial Rome was exceptional at adopting things they came across in their conquest and travels and then putting them to good use in their own culture and military doctrines. The gladius means sword in Latin, but the etymology has much earlier roots. From the word gladius, we also get the word gladiator, Gladys Knight and the Pimps, glad I asked you over for dinner, and other common phrases that we've heard. Some of its most distinctive traits are a short and fat blade. The blade on a Roman Gladius traditionally did not taper much from the guard all the way to the tip, and it stayed fairly fat the entire way all the way down. Also, a very chunky, stubby guard, the piece of metal right above where the hand is holding, is a very distinctive feature of the Roman Gladius. And then a pommel, a large pommel right below the handle, similar to Viking short swords as well as Celtic short swords, where the Roman Gladius actually took its characteristics from. The Gladius was usually between 24 and 33 inches in length and up to 2.7 pounds in weight. As in everything that I build, what I try to do is show that I am just an ordinary guy with ordinary tools making things that are above ordinary. I don't have expensive tools. I am blessed with a pretty nice shop, but most of my tools have been bought from Home Depot or from salvage yards or from hand-me-downs from people. With most of the things that I build that involve casting, I make my own recipe of bronze, which is probably 80% copper, a little bit of brass, a little bit of tin, and some lead in there. And I start with making the forms. And here I'm making the pommel, which is going to be obviously three-dimensional, making it on the lathe first, making it out of wood, and then I move on to casting those items as soon as the wood forms are created. There are two ways that I cast things in my shop. One is with this little crucible that I have here, and I put the ingredients into the crucible and then stick it into my forge. My forge I bought off of eBay. It's a very cheap forge. It's a 2-burner forge, which is nice, but it's about 18 inches in length, and I stick this directly underneath one of the burners. Most of the time when I cast things, especially for weapons, I do it in a monolithic way, which, as you see here with this sword, they're done in one piece. And as also on this dagger, the guards and the pommels are both one piece. With this particular build, I was going to try something new. I wanted to cast the pommel and the guards in hemispheres, in two halves, and then try to put them together this way. I will say I won't probably ever do that again. It takes things a lot longer. It's more difficult to do. Here you see me spraying tenactin on the wood forms that I created for the casting. That is so that when I pull them out of the casting clay, they come right out. They don't hold clay with them, and it makes it a little bit easier when it comes to keeping the form in the clay. And now it's time to pour the first of the hemispheres. This is the second method that I use for casting. This is a kiln that I bought also off of eBay. It's a larger form factor and it goes into a dedicated furnace. It does take a lot longer for this to heat up and to render things molten, but once it's there, you can feed it indefinitely and just keep feeding it, and it does a great job. This is the guard that I'm casting, and as you can see, I'm doing it in 2 halves, 2 hemispheres, which I created in wood forms. Now I've got the hemispheres lined out. They just need to be sanded. I put them together so that each side I sand is uniform with the other side, making it look like a very even piece. They're looking pretty good. So now it's on to cutting out the ringlets that'll go onto the handle of the sword. The ringlets are going to be cut from a solid piece of brass stock that I got from a salvage yard somewhere, and I had forgotten how thermally conductive brass and copper can be, and I actually picked this up off of the floor, and lo and behold, it was still smoking when I put it back on the bench, and my hands have the scars for a couple weeks later, still bearing the singe marks, the burn marks from picking that piece up. And as you can see, after I was done cutting them, they were hot enough each to start to melt into the plastic work table that I had supporting my chop saw. Basically, every project that I do is filled with hard-won knowledge, new learnings. I've done hundreds of these sorts of things, and I'm always trying new practices, new tools. Again, self-taught. Do look up videos, do look up instructionals, but there are times when just learning it the old-fashioned way is the best way. Here's my brother, and this brings me to what the blade is. I was lucky enough to find this leaf spring off in the National Forest, and I think it's an old buggy leaf spring, and it is literally perfect for making a sword blade. It's the exact dimensions I would want it to be for a Gladius. It had a fuller kind of already in it, and so my brother was straightening it out from the forge. And of course, a leaf spring of any sort is made from spring steel, which again, ideal to make sword blades out of. Retains its shape. Right here I'm annealing it quite a bit, so it's actually, as we're doing this and I'm forming it, it's actually becoming softer and softer, and that's great because I intend to quench it and harden it later, but for the purposes of cutting out the forms and grinding on it, it's very helpful for it to be softer and annealed. So I have this Harbor Freight portable bandsaw, which I use pretty much every single time I do anything with metal. That is one of the things that I use. Great item, cheap item, does a lot for me. Now I'm cutting out the actual hilt, the actual tang of the blade, and it's going to be about a ½ inch in width because I intend to slip over the top of it the pieces of the handle that you'll see coming up here pretty soon. Part of the design that I wanted to do has this cutout right above the guard. It's not bladed, it's not sharp, but it just gives it a little bit extra character. It has a little bit more of a finished look to it, which I really enjoy. And now it's on to the grindstone to get these surfaces smoothed out and the lines a little bit better. I have 3 grinders on my shop, most of which have been got from salvage yards or from secondhand sales, but I always want to have grinders that have the stone wheels, wire wheels, and then some sanding apparatus on one of the ones which you'll see here in a little bit as well. Because it's a leaf spring, it does have that interesting bolt hole in the center that I just needed to weld closed very quickly, button that up. As I mentioned, this leaf spring had basically a fuller already in it when I got to it. So I wanted to hit it with the die grinder here very quickly before I bring it to my large grinding wheel, just to increase the size and the definition of that fuller. And here's this giant grinding wheel that somebody just gave me. It looks like an airplane engine on this thing. And I will say that when you run this, that thing is quiet. You could have a whispering conversation with that thing on. Here are the other two halves of the hemisphere for the pommel. I'm going to go ahead and put some solder in there to define them a little bit better and make sure that they don't look so much like two halves of something. When I'm done sanding this and soldering this, hopefully it looks like one monolithic piece. But as I mentioned, this isn't something that I think I'll ever do again. After getting that all polished up, I'm going to go ahead and put a 5/16 hole into this and then put some threads into that to thread it onto the base of the sword. I have to be honest, this is one of my favorite parts of the entire build. This wood right here is tiger maple, and it actually is that color of purple naturally. It is an amazing looking wood I found at the wood shop, which was a fortuitous find for me in some of my builds. I'm using a hole saw to cut out inch in diameter dowels. I don't want these dowels to be perfectly cylindrical. I want them to have a little bit of a convex shape to them. So I threaded them onto a bolt, put that bolt into the drill press, and then I tried at first to use a file to get that convex shape, but that really was taking way too long. So then I got my die grinder, put a stone wheel on it, and that seemed to do the trick. Now it's time to shore things up just a little bit more with the angle grinder to make sure that I can cut some threads onto the base of this blade. Again, I'm cutting 5/16 size threads to fit the pommel. That's a good size. It's a little bit bigger, of course, than 1/4 of an inch, but it's not as hefty as 3/8 of an inch, so it seems to be perfect for the things that I tend to do, and it fits like a glove. And just a quick fit up for the pieces that are going to go onto the handle. That's the base that goes right below the guard, and then your first piece of brass ringlet, your dowels, ringlets, dowels, and then the pommel, just to see that it all fits, and it fits quite well. I often forget this part, and this is the all-important artist touch mark. This is the blacksmith's logo, brand, icon, initials. Mine is just my initials, J and L. I carved them into an old chisel, and I just use that to stamp it into the items that I'm making. And now for the quench, and I'm still fairly novice at the quench. I have just your regular motor oil in the canister next to me here, and I'm getting the blade hot. Because it's an 18-inch Ford and the blade is 26 inches, it does make it a little difficult to heat the thing uniformly. Nice big mistake coming up in 3, 2, 1. As you'll see, I did not get it hot to begin with, and you're going to start to see all of the splatters coming from the oil out of that canister. So a lot of oil hit the floor. Not a great look on the video, but as I've said before, I don't edit out any of my mistakes. This is one of my big learnings from this particular project. Clean up on aisle doofus, clean up on aisle doofus. Here I'm just going to go ahead and finish up the overall profile of the blade on my belt sander, and you'll notice another large mistake that I've made on this build was mounting that particular belt sander just the few hours before. I melted it backwards so that the sparks fly up into my face. I had face protection, so that's fine, but I had to go ahead and remedy that situation. Now I'm going to go ahead and start putting the edge on the blade. I did actually change the profile slightly from a traditional Gladius so that it just ever so slightly tapers towards the tip. I like that idea. It's almost imperceptible, but it was enough that it's something that I can tell. And here I am. I'm going to use a 80 grit sandpaper to go ahead and start cutting the edge into this blade. This is a very long process, given that this blade was probably 5/16 in thickness, but I get it pretty close down to the dimensions that I wanted, and then I hit it with several other types of sanders that I don't have on camera, but finally finishing up with an actual whetstone. Spend a lot of time with a whetstone to get it silky smooth and very, very sharp. And this is of course the 1000 grit side of the whetstone, and the other side I believe is a 3000 grit side that I used as well. Now I'm going to go ahead and put the guard on, and I'm going to start off by putting a little bit of epoxy on either side so that I can get it at least set before I drill the holes and end up riveting it to the blade. I have learned many times the hard way that when you're putting rivets into something, you want to get the rivet head, the one that sticks out of the hole at the end that you're going to be hammering, as close to the material as you really can. Otherwise, you're just going to bend the rivet in the material, and then it's going to look terrible, and it's going to be hard to get out. So I'm clipping off the head so that they're just the right dimensions. I got to be honest, I make a lot of swords, a lot of weapons, a lot of armor, and riveting can sometimes be my Achilles heel. It can also be one of my favorite things to do, and on this particular build it came out real well. Now we're going to go ahead and epoxy up the components to the handle, making a lot of epoxy just to go ahead and set the handle, and it's a quick set epoxy so that I can get a feel for it pretty quickly. I don't have to let it dry for too long before it looks uniform. One of the other things I do that probably isn't the best craftsmanship, but it's something that I enjoy, is to fill up all of the cracks with the epoxy that I have left over, and then I come back by and I sand that all off so that it has a very clean, uniform look to it. And then here I am sanding this down. My daughter helper in the background with her little dance moves is really keeping me occupied, but just getting everything so that it looks uniform. It looks like it is one piece and it was meant to go together in the exact way that you see it here. Last but not least is the all-important linseed oil. I use this on all of my armor and all of my weapons and implements to keep them protected from the elements. If I'm going to darken a piece, I'll use linseed oil to darken it after I heat it up, but with the sword, it's already been quenched and heat treated. I'm just going to go ahead and leave it this color. I will be the first to tell you that I do not tend to get my weapons extremely sharp. Most of the time they're tool sharp, but on this particular one I wanted to get it very sharp and just see how it did, and it looked like it did really well. And this is the final product. It came out really, really well, right at 3.7 pounds. So it's actually heavier than a Roman Gladius, but the Romans also had a longer sword specifically for cavalry, or most of the time for cavalry, called a spatha, and that actually fits quite well to the dimensions and the weight of this particular weapon. Forgive the background, the cheesy background. I was playing with video effects. I'm gonna leave it up because it's so cheesy. I just decided that why not? Thank you for joining me for this build. It was really enjoyable. The sword came out pretty much the way that I wanted it to. I really like the design. I like the overall look. I like the way that the casted items came out. The tiger maple on the handle looks great to me. It is a very sharp sword. Probably the sharpest blade that I've created. This leaf spring is an absolute to die for sword builders. I'll be looking for more of these in the National Forest here pretty shortly once the snow melts. So the things that I learned on this are as follows. First off, preheat your oil when quenching your items. Secondly, allow for some expansion in your oil receptacle. When you put in your molten hot pieces of metal, it's going to boil, it's going to expand, and I did not allow for that, and I had some cleanup to do. Thirdly, remember that non-ferrous metals heat up much, much faster and conduct heat much quicker than iron, than ferrous metals. My fingers will live to tell the tale of that for a few more weeks, I'm certain. And then the fourth thing that I learned is this: when I go ahead and cast pommels, guards, that sort of thing, I will continue to do it as a monolithic structure, as a pass-through item, so that I can just drill through it, place the blade, the tang, the pommel on the end as one piece. Doing it in hemispheres just was double the work. It was a lot more. I won't be doing that again. I look forward to having you for the next build. I will be making a scabbard for this in your everyday average Jonathan format, which is a mix of traditional and a mix of my own styles. I look forward to having you then.